As the sun began to dip behind the trees in the tranquil forest, David stumbled upon a sight that stopped him cold. Just a few feet ahead stood a bear, its eyes glossy with tears, like it was silently begging for help. David's heart jumped. He tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Running into a bear in the woods wasn't anything new for him. He'd hiked enough forest trails to know it came with the territory. But this bear was different. It wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It didn't even run off. If anything, it looked heartbroken. And maybe, just maybe, like it was crying. David's first instinct was to puff himself up and shout, hoping to scare the bear off. But it didn't budge. In fact, it started walking slowly toward him. David froze. He knew better than to run. All he could do was stand still and wait to see what would happen next. The bear moved cautiously, not like it wanted to attack, but like it had a reason for being there. It was the strangest thing David had ever experienced out in the wild. Sure, he'd been in risky situations on hikes before, but this was on a whole other level. He stayed frozen in place as the bear came right up to him, sniffing his jeans, his shoes, and even his hands. David knew that if the bear wanted to, one bite and his fingers would be gone. His pulse pounded in his ears. Then the bear backed up slowly and stood tall on its hind legs. It let out a low growl, not loud or threatening, just enough to grab David's attention. That's when something clicked. The bear wasn't warning him off. It was asking for something. David didn't know how to show he meant no harm, so he decided to try something. Slowly, carefully, he stepped toward the bear and held out his hands. He mimicked the bear's sniffing from earlier, hoping the bear would understand he was trying to connect. And surprisingly, it worked. The bear let him come close. When David finished sniffing around, the bear dropped back down on all fours and started to walk away. David let out a shaky breath. Was that it? But the bear only took a few steps before stopping and looking back at him. When it saw David wasn't moving, it let out a louder growl, like it was saying, "Come on." That's when David knew for sure. The bear wanted him to follow. So he did. He started walking after it, and as soon as the bear saw that, it kept moving down the trail. As they hiked deeper into the woods, David's mind raced. What if this was all a trap? What if the bear was leading him somewhere dangerous? The what-ifs swirled so fast in his head, he started feeling lightheaded. He shook his head and took a deep breath. Thinking like that would only make things worse. He had to trust his gut, and for some strange reason, he did. David had to rely on the bear's strange, quiet trust in him, that somehow it knew he wasn't a threat and wasn't about to get attacked. The bear led him along the trail he'd already planned to hike, and for nearly half an hour, they stayed on course. Then, out of nowhere, the bear veered off into the woods. David paused. Leaving the trail made him nervous. What if he couldn't find his way back afterward? He didn't want to get lost out here. But the bear wasn't having it. It let out a louder growl when it saw David stop. Its teeth even showed a little this time. David realized there was no time to stand around worrying. He had to trust that his experience in the wild would help him get back later. So he followed, staying close behind the bear and making mental notes of anything that stood out. A strange rock, mossy tree bark, a snapped branch. Then he began to hear it, the sound of rushing water somewhere up ahead. It grew louder with every step, and as it did, a pit settled in his stomach. He knew this area. It meant they were deep in the forest now, far from any marked trail. When they reached the river, David could see how strong the current was. The water was moving way too fast, no way anyone could safely cross. But clearly the bear already knew that. So why bring him here? David scanned the riverbank, thinking maybe a cub was stuck nearby. But there was nothing. Then the bear started pacing along the edge, clearly agitated. David had the strange feeling the bear did want him to cross, but now understood it couldn't be done. It had rained hard the day before, and that must have caused the water levels to spike. Maybe the bear had come from the other side before the river swelled. Just as David was trying to make sense of it all, he heard a sound across the river. It wasn't loud, but enough to make him snap to attention. It didn't sound like a bear cub, though. It was something else. He looked over, unsure what it was, while the bear kept pacing, growling now and then. At one point, it even dipped a paw in the water like it was ready to try crossing, but then quickly pulled back. David turned his head, scanning the area, and then he saw it. Just a little ways downstream, something stretched across the river. He moved toward it, trying not to alarm the bear or make it think he was leaving. What he found was a shaky-looking bridge thrown together with fallen logs and vines. It didn't look exactly safe, but it might be his only option. The bear stood nearby, glancing back and forth from the water to David, clearly on edge. David took a deep breath. Then, carefully, he stepped onto the bridge. Every step David took was careful and slow, his eyes locked on the makeshift bridge beneath him. He tested the weight of each spot before shifting forward. Behind him, the bear stood still, its breath rising in the cool air as it watched him move across. Every creak from the wood or tug of the vines made David flinch, his heart pounding harder. He avoided looking down at the fast-moving water and kept his focus on the far side of the river. His hands held tight to the vines, their rough edges digging into his palms. Each step was a reminder of why he was doing this, to help the bear, to understand what had driven it to seek him out in the first place. From across the river, the bear kept its eyes on David, watching his slow progress. It looked uneasy, as if weighing the danger of the shaky bridge against the importance of what was waiting on the other side. After a long moment, the bear moved forward and gently placed one paw on the bridge. The whole thing swayed, but didn't give way. That small success gave the bear some courage, and slowly it began to cross, never taking its eyes off David. When David finally stepped onto solid ground, he let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned back just in time to see the bear make its last steps across. There was something in the bear's eyes, a visible wave of relief that matched David's own. For a few seconds, they just stood there, side by side, as if recovering from what they'd just been through. Man and bear, two strangers connected by something neither could explain. David's heart was still racing, not just from the risky crossing, but from what he now understood. They were heading into the unknown together. The bear gave a little shake, almost like it was shaking off the fear of the bridge. Then it turned to David and held his gaze for a moment. There was no growl or sound, but something about that look felt like a quiet thank you. Without needing a sign, David knew it was time to keep going. He stepped forward again, this time following the bear as it moved deeper into the forest, away from everything familiar. The trail disappeared behind them. The farther they went, the rougher the terrain became. Thick brush snagged at David's pants, and the ground beneath him was uneven and unpredictable. Meanwhile, the bear moved through it all with ease, like it had lived here all its life. David realized just how far off the beaten path they were. This wasn't just any hike. This was untouched wilderness. The trees grew taller and closer, making the forest feel heavier, almost like it was closing in. David felt that mix of wonder and nervousness building inside him. This place was wild in the truest sense. He could feel it. Strange animal calls echoed from somewhere deep in the woods, and every rustle in the leaves reminded him just how alone they were out here. Despite all his past hikes, this was unlike anything he'd ever faced, physically and even emotionally. They kept going, the bear leading with quiet confidence, and David doing his best to keep up. Fallen logs blocked their way, and thick vines hung down like curtains from the trees. David spotted all kinds of animal tracks on the ground and claw marks etched into tree trunks, signs that this forest had its own stories. It wasn't anything like the clean, marked trails he knew. This place didn't have signs or directions. Here, the only rule was nature. David knew now he was completely relying on the bear. Every step forward was a choice to trust this wild animal, to believe that it had a reason for bringing him here. The whole thing felt unreal. If someone had told him he'd be following a bear through a forest he'd never seen before, he would have laughed. But here he was, walking deeper into the unknown, led by a creature that made no sense, and yet felt oddly right. The bear moved with clear purpose, its steps strong and sure. It wasn't wandering. It knew this land. It moved through the terrain like it belonged to it, reading the forest in a way only a wild animal could. David followed closely behind, quietly watching, still wondering where they were headed, and why this journey had started in the first place. As the day slipped away and evening settled in, the forest began to change. The light faded quickly, blocked by thick trees above them. Long shadows stretched across the ground, and the dark closed in. With every step, the world around them grew more still and more eerie. David felt his senses sharpen. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snapped twig made his heart beat faster. But the bear didn't seem to mind. It kept moving, steady and calm, as if the coming night didn't bother it at all. Around them, the forest slowly came alive with sound. Strange calls echoed from the trees, some high, some low, most completely unfamiliar. David tried to place them but couldn't. It only made everything feel more tense. Still, he had no choice but to keep going. He leaned on the bear's steady presence more and more, knowing he'd be completely lost without it. As darkness settled over them and the moon started to glow through the trees, David felt the weight of where they were. They were far, really far, from any marked trail or map. The forest felt endless, like they'd stepped out of his old life and into something ancient. It was both incredible and a little scary. Being this deep into the wild made David feel small, like a guest in a place that didn't care if he stayed or left. But the bear stayed close, never too far ahead, almost like it could feel David's nerves rising. Its presence gave him something to hold on to, a little bit of peace in the dark. The forest around them now looked silver and shadowed, lit only by the faint light of the moon. David scanned the trees as they walked, alert for any movement. Everything looked different at night, quieter but also more alive. The bear, sensing his tension, stayed just within reach. Having it nearby felt oddly comforting, like he wasn't entirely alone out here. The cool night air carried the scent of pine and soil, grounding him in the moment. Everything around them was raw, untouched, and real. And through it all, the bear kept moving, calm, aware, focused. Sometimes it would stop and sniff the air or pause to listen. David watched closely during those moments. It was like the bear could hear something he couldn't, some language between animal and forest. In those pauses, the bear seemed to be part of something older than David could explain, like it belonged to this world in a way he never could. He was just passing through. The bear, though, it was home. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, David spotted something strange caught in the underbrush. He bent down and picked up a torn, weathered piece of paper. The colors, though faded, still showed a picture of a bear, dancing. It was part of an old circus poster. The sight of it sent a chill through him. Finding something like this, so deep in the wild, felt completely out of place. It was a quiet echo of a forgotten past, a reminder that people had once reached even here. As they continued on, David began to notice odd footprints pressed into the soft ground. These weren't the usual tracks he'd expect to see in the forest. They were larger, with strange patterns he couldn't quite make out. A creeping unease settled in. Someone, or something, had come this way before, and whatever it was didn't belong to the natural wildlife. Still, the bear pressed on, undisturbed. It followed the trail like it recognized the signs, walking with the same quiet determination as before. David followed, more curious now than ever. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they were chasing after something hidden. Farther down the path, they found more signs of human presence. A length of old rope swung gently from a low tree branch, and nearby, rusted pieces of what might have been tools or gear lay scattered across the forest floor. Whatever these items were, they had clearly been left here long ago, slowly being swallowed by nature. It was eerie. These bits and pieces hinted at people who had once been here, but were now long gone. Each discovery added to the weight of the mystery. David couldn't stop thinking about it. The circus poster, the strange footprints, the forgotten objects, all of it seemed connected. But how? He tried to piece things together, forming a story in his mind from the scattered clues. With each step, his questions multiplied. What happened here? What brought the bear to him? And why now? The deeper they went, the more the story seemed to unfold, though still in fragments. David began to imagine a traveling circus, animals and performers moving from town to town, who somehow ended up here, lost or abandoned. The idea was haunting. Something must have happened to leave all these pieces behind in a place so remote and wild. With every clue they passed, the urgency in the bear's movements made more sense. It wasn't just a walk through the woods anymore, it was a mission. David could feel it. The mystery wasn't just about the past, it was about what still remained. Then the forest suddenly opened up into a wide clearing, and David stopped in his tracks. In front of him lay the broken remains of a circus. The big top tent, once full of color and life, was now sagging and torn. Its stripes were faded, and patches flapped in the breeze. Rusted rides sat still in the tall grass. Abandoned stands leaned to one side, their paint chipped away by time. The whole place felt frozen, like a memory left behind. As David walked closer, his attention was drawn to a row of cages. Inside, animals moved restlessly, or not at all. Some paced back and forth, others lay motionless, eyes dull with exhaustion. Their expressions hit David hard. These animals were stuck here, left behind, forgotten. The sadness in their faces told stories of waiting, hoping, and being let down. Seeing them like this stirred something deep in David. The bear had brought him here for a reason. And now, standing in the middle of this lost and crumbling place, he finally began to understand why. The abandoned circus stirred a mix of emotions in David. Old posters still clung to the sides of torn tents, their once bright colors faded by time. Bits of decoration, now weather-worn and scattered, hinted at a past filled with laughter and applause. But all that remained now was silence, heavy and still. It felt like joy had been cut off mid-breath, leaving only the faintest echo behind. As they moved through the grounds, David noticed something shift in the bear's behavior. It no longer led with the same urgency. Instead, it moved more slowly, sniffing the air with deep, thoughtful breaths. It paused often, lingering near cages, glancing back at David, as if trying to say something. There was no doubt in David's mind now. This place meant something to the bear, something real, something painful. Standing in the middle of the ruins, David felt the weight of it all. This circus had once been a place of wonder, full of crowds and excitement. Now it was falling apart, forgotten by everyone except the forest slowly reclaiming it. Vines had grown over the tents, and trees were rising through broken structures. What was once a place of joy had become a ghost town swallowed by nature. The more he looked around, the more David felt a deep sorrow settle in his chest. The animals, still in their cages, tired, thin, and afraid, broke his heart. He moved quietly from one enclosure to the next. Some animals paced, others lay still, their eyes empty. The air felt thick with sadness. David could barely take it in. Watching the bear more closely, David began to understand something he hadn't seen before. This wasn't just any forest bear. This one knew this place. It walked through the circus grounds like someone returning to a childhood home, each stop, each sniff, filled with meaning. It paused at corners, cages, old marks on the ground. Sometimes it let out a quiet, almost mournful sound. That's when it hit David. The bear had once lived here. It had been part of this circus, maybe even one of the main attractions. The idea left David speechless. The bear that had guided him through the forest, the same one that had shown such emotion, had once been trapped here, too. The pieces fit together painfully. This was a story of being left behind, of performers, both people and animals, discarded when the show ended. David felt a deep ache in his chest. The bear had escaped, but many had not. And even now, years later, it had come back. Maybe to remember, maybe to ask for help. As David stood among the wreckage, he couldn't ignore the stark contrast between the life-filled forest and this lifeless circus. Nature had kept growing, beautiful, wild, and free. But the circus? It was a reminder of what happens when humans abandon what they've built. The difference between the two hit David hard. One was alive, the other was crumbling. He didn't just feel sad, he felt moved. He couldn't walk away and pretend he hadn't seen this. Something had to be done. The animals needed help, and fast. Driven by urgency, David reached for his phone and checked for a signal. Nothing. He walked around, arm raised, hoping to catch just one bar. Someone had to be called. Animal rescue, park services, anyone. These animals had waited long enough. This was a race against time, and David was determined not to let them be forgotten again. David pulled out his phone, hands shaking as he tried to dial. The signal was barely there, just a faint flicker in this far-off corner of the forest. He moved quickly, walking around the clearing and raising the phone high, hoping to catch even the smallest bit of reception. Finally, a weak connection came through. Without wasting a second, David explained the situation, his voice tight with urgency and hope. He stayed calm, but every word carried the weight of what he'd seen. He gave as many details as he could, the location, the animals, the broken-down circus hidden in the trees. Every bit of information felt important. As he spoke, he glanced over at the bear and the others. Their eyes met his, nervous, tired, but somehow full of hope. This call might be their only chance. Just as he finished and ended the call, the signal dropped, the screen went dark. Silence returned, thick and heavy. David stared down at his phone, heart sinking, wondering if the message had made it through. He could only hope someone was on their way. The sky was fading now, the last bit of daylight slipping away. Night was coming fast. David knew he couldn't leave. Not now. He'd have to stay with the animals through the night. He began gathering branches and what little shelter he could piece together. The bear stayed close, its presence steady and quiet, like it understood this night was important. David's mind raced. He thought about the rescue team, how long it might take them to arrive, and how they'd get the animals out safely. He was exhausted, but he couldn't let himself rest. Not while these lives hung in the balance. He settled in beside the cages, checking on the animals now and then. He spoke to them in a soft voice, knowing they didn't understand the words, but hoping the sound helped. The bear kept close, lying nearby, almost like it was standing guard with him. They were two unlikely watchers in a place filled with silence and history. Throughout the night, David stayed alert. His eyes shifted between the dark forest and the still cages. Every noise, every snap of a twig or shift in the wind pulled his focus. He could feel how on edge the animals were. The bear made soft, low sounds now and then. Birds shifted, paws paced, and the soft rustle of movement created a rhythm of tension and waiting. The moonlight gave the circus an eerie glow. Everything looked silver, like a quiet dream turned strange. But the pain here was real. David could feel the animal's fear in the air, thick and sharp. It pushed him to stay sharp, to not give in to the fatigue weighing on his eyes. During the quieter moments, David found himself thinking about the bear, about how it had found him, and why. It had trusted him without words, without knowing anything about him. And now, here they were, watching over these forgotten animals together. David felt a strange connection to the bear, as if they were meant to cross paths just for this. He sat in the dark, listening to the forest sounds, waiting. Every hour that passed brought them closer to sunrise, closer to help, he hoped. David imagined the sound of tires crunching over forest ground, of voices calling out, of cages being opened. He didn't know if it would happen, but he held on to that hope, watching the sky, waiting for dawn to break. His spirits lifted, a flicker of hope shining through the dark. The bear stayed close all night, a quiet, watchful companion. Without words, the two shared something real, a bond built through everything they'd been through together. The bear's soft sounds and steady glances felt like a kind of conversation. David felt deeply connected to this wild creature. They were partners now, standing side by side to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Just as the sky began to lighten, David heard something in the distance. Engines. His heart jumped. The sound grew louder until, finally, a line of vehicles broke through the trees. Wildlife rescue teams and law enforcement had arrived. Relief hit David hard as he ran to meet them, his voice steady but full of urgency. The rescuers took in the scene with shock, then quickly got to work. To David, their arrival felt like a promise kept. These animals finally had a chance. As the rescue began, more of the circus's dark history came to light. The team found old papers and records, proof of illegal activity, including poaching and the trafficking of exotic animals. David explained how the bear had led him here, uncovering a hidden story buried in the woods for who knows how long. The truth was worse than anyone expected. Cruelty, neglect, and years of suffering, all left to rot in silence. David stayed busy, helping however he could. He moved from cage to cage, offering calm words and gentle hands. He helped open locks, carried supplies, and comforted the animals as they stepped into freedom. Each one, from the bear to the smallest monkey, was checked over and cared for. Watching them take their first steps into safety brought a flood of emotion, sadness for what they'd endured, and hope for what lay ahead. Word of the rescue spread fast. News crews arrived, cameras rolling. Journalists spoke with David and the team, capturing every moment. The story hit hard, photos of the abandoned circus, videos of the rescue, and the shocking truth about its past. People all over began to talk. The issue of animal rights took center stage. Investigations opened, debates followed. The story sparked a wider push for better animal protection laws and more oversight on wildlife captivity. The bear, once trapped in this place, became a symbol of strength, survival, and the change that could come from speaking up. After everything, David couldn't go back to life as usual. He threw himself into advocacy. He spoke at events, joined conservation efforts, and partnered with animal welfare groups. His story had changed him. Now he used it to give a voice to those who had none. David's story began to travel. Through interviews, articles, and a blog, he started to share the full journey. From a quiet hike to a life-changing rescue, people connected with it. They learned, they cared. Many were inspired to act. His words helped others see the importance of empathy, protection, and responsibility toward animals and the natural world. In his quieter moments, David often looked back on the experience. It had changed how he saw everything, nature, animals, even his own purpose. He thought about the bear often, that silent, powerful guide who had led him here. Their journey hadn't just saved lives, it had opened David's heart in a way he'd never expected. He kept visiting the forest, the same one where it had all begun. These visits reminded him of his promise to protect. He walked the trails with care, always hoping to spot the bear again. And even when he didn't, he felt its presence in the trees and wind. Its legacy lived on in everything David now stood for. To David, the bear had become something more than just an animal. It was a symbol of healing, strength, and the wild's ability to teach and inspire. And though their paths had parted, the journey they shared kept moving forward through David's work, his voice, and the quiet steps he took toward protecting the wild world around him. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Help us spread awareness and support the protection of wildlife and the places they call home.
If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone who may find it interesting. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.